Wednesday, February 23rd, 2022, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. We're going to look at CBDC today, central bank digital currency, and why, in my opinion, it's becoming more and more clear that CBDC is the road to serfdom. And that's a reference to one of the first Austrian School of Economics book that I read, and I actually read this book in the 80s before I got into the Austrian school in the early 2000s, and it's called The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich von Hayek, one of the most influential economists, I would say, of the second half of the 20th century. Highly recommend that book. I was looking for it and I couldn't find it. I must have lent it to someone. That's what happens sometimes. You'd lend someone books and sometimes you don't get it back. But I have another one by Hayek. It's called The Fatal Conceit, The Errors of Socialism. That's another interesting one. But I think I'm going to have to buy another Road to Serfdom to read it again, to refresh. I remember him talking about competing currencies, that you should have maybe private competing currencies. So we're going to look at that today. Before I start, I like to say that when we cover the markets today, we're going to look at agricultural commodities. And I think that could be the next major crisis. Not that we don't have a crisis already with rising food prices, with the situation in Ukraine and Russia, the geopolitical instability, all the talk of sanctions or sanctions being imposed. There's a lot of speculation about what could happen to the energy supply. Yes, many things. And we're going to look into that. So we'll go now into the CBDC. And what's happening in Canada is very telling, even without a CBDC. The government there has frozen people's bank accounts. I saw, though, a headline somewhere this morning. I didn't go into the story, but it looks like they're going to give those protesters their money back. They're going to unfreeze the money. But I think it's already too late. I think people are realizing that that's a huge problem. Even without CBDC, that corporations, in this instance, banks, financial institutions, will do what the government tells them. And it's really ironic because I saw someone on TikTok the other day say, Jeffrey Epstein, they didn't freeze his accounts with JP Morgan, did they, after 2008 when he was convicted for some crimes in Florida? He was still banking with JP Morgan until probably he was finally arrested in 2019. I think that was the year. And here you have people peacefully protesting for their freedom, and they freeze their accounts. The other example I'll give you is that the same people that are in charge now that want to bring the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, they're the people, and by the people I mean the Bank for International Settlements, and this bank is owned by the major central banks. It's owned by JP Morgan. I'm not making this up. You can go into the BIS's website or Google the founders, major shareholders of the BIS, and JP Morgan is one of them. They, for example, in 1938, when Germany invaded the Sudetenland or Czechoslovakia, the BIS allowed the Germans to confiscate, to take the Czechoslovak gold from the BIS account. Guess where? At the Bank of England. So it goes to show you that these central bankers, the bankers, and I have to say, yes, it's to do with Wall Street, City of London. Is everyone that works on Wall Street, City of London, or whatever other financial center, are they evil like this? No, I genuinely think that the majority of people there are good people. Some of them at the top, I think, are not. That's what happens. And after all, I did work in the City of London for over 20 years. So, yes, CBDC. And it comes down to the money, and that's why I've focused on the money so much, on the history of money. And it's interchangeable, of course. We're talking really about currency here, but I'm not going to get into that discussion here. It's more to do with what's going on. It's all about freedom. Even in the 19th century and early 20th century, when we had coins, gold and silver coins, that were minted by, let's say, the Royal Mint, another sovereign monarch's mint, or in the case of the US Mint. Your money was something private, something that you could keep and no one asked any questions. It seems to me this CBDC idea, it's almost like having your parents control what you do all your life. That's what it's going to become. You can become a serf to the people in charge. And now we're going to look at some tweets, or one of the tweets I saw yesterday. And this is by an MP in the UK, Steve Baker. It's encouraging. Steve Baker knows a lot about money. He made a speech a few years ago in Parliament about sound money. And this is what he tweeted about 16 hours ago. Trudeau freezing protesters' bank accounts should worry us all. It illustrates why we must resist a programmable central bank digital currency. CBDC would allow the issuer complete control over and if the holders could spend such currency. So, for example, if you bought too much booze one day and you spent half the CBDC you had in your wallet, they could freeze your account because they don't like what you're doing. Or if you back some certain political movement or some activist movement, they could freeze it very easily, like they've done in Canada. And I think it's interesting that an MP in the UK is saying that about Canada. And ironically as well, pot calling the kettle black, so to speak. I retweeted this from Santiago Capital, the man famous for the dollar milkshake theory. He tweeted this out. Apparently, Prime Minister Trudeau says Canada will stand against authoritarianism, announces sanctions against Russia. I wonder if he's going to sanction himself. So what's programmable digital currency? And this has been talked about actually in the last year or so. There's an article here in the Telegraph from June 2021. It says Bank of England tells ministers to intervene on digital currency programming. Digital cash could be programmed to ensure it is only spent on essentials or goods which an employer or government deems to be sensible. I mean, this is just, if people don't realize this is so authoritarian, so, well, we're going back to being serfs, as I said, the road to serfdom. So let's go through this quickly here, some of this article, and you get the idea what it is. The Bank of England has called on ministers to decide whether a central bank digital currency should be programmable, ultimately giving the issuer control over how it is spent by the recipient. Tom Mutton, a director of the Bank of England, said during a conference on Monday that programming could become a key feature of any future central bank digital currency, in which the money would be programmed to be released only when something happens. He said you could introduce programmability. What happens if one of the participants in a transaction puts a restriction on future use of money? There could be some socially beneficial outcomes from that, preventing activity which is seen to be socially harmful in some way, but at the same time, it could be a restriction on people's freedoms. Yeah, they're going to play good cop and bad cop, but just the fact that they're talking about it is pretty worrying. There's another topic which I haven't covered, and thanks for Full of Hope for mentioning that. They're thinking of bringing in this new human rights law here in the UK. I think they're going to look into it and maybe even have a vote on it on March 8th this year. And it's basically stripping away the common law rights of an individual, that an individual is free unless he commits a crime. They could change this to say that if you do something that hurts the greater good, it could be considered a crime. And this is going to collectivism. This is reminds me of the argument from that Austrian leader in the 30s. It was for the greater good of the Reich, right? So how do we fight this? Well, we need to keep exposing this CBDC and how authoritarian it could be, how it could be really strip away our freedoms. And it's encouraging that Steve Baker spoke about it. There's also been a recent podcast that Joe Rogan did. And to be honest, I never really listened too much to Joe Rogan. My wife has been listening to him for a few months or maybe over a year. And so I've downloaded the Spotify app, and I listened to an interview he posted a few days ago on February 19th, and it's podcast number 1780, Maajid Nawaz. And Maajid Nawaz, he was speaking about these controversial subjects like CBDC, like the COVID pandemic, like mandates, and he was a popular radio presenter here in the UK for LBC. And they sacked him because he was saying things that made them uncomfortable. He was basically talking about the truth, what's really going on. So, and Maajid Nawaz talks a lot about the monetary system towards the end of the interview. It's a 3-hour interview. I highly recommend you watch the whole thing. I didn't watch it in one go. I watched a little bit and I stopped, and then the next day, that's how I did it. But I was really surprised. I had heard of him. I had listened to him before, of how clever, how knowledgeable, and how articulate Maajid Nawaz is. And his range of knowledge is not just to do with political activism, but it's to do with economics, monetary affairs. So he spoke about this as well, the programmable CBDC. And he said that the powers that be could orchestrate a crisis. And this is where we come to what's happening in Russia. They could easily orchestrate a crisis like a cyber pandemic, turn everything off, and say that we need central banks now to control the CBDC, because having different banks in the system, private banks, commercial banks, is too dangerous. They could do that. And the other problem with what's going on is in Russia, and will now switch in a minute to the markets and the agricultural commodities. Before we do, though, I'd like to say, so yes, we need to keep informing people about this. That's the only way for them to be exposed. And if people know that CBDCs, that it's bad news, then they will have a difficult time implementing it. The other thing that I've been speaking about for many years since I've started this channel is to get out of the system. And of course, I know it's difficult to transact day to day with physical gold and silver, but at least it gives you a foot outside the system in terms of your savings, because they can't really cancel your gold and silver, your physical gold and silver. Yesterday, one of my good friends from the city, he's a bond guy. He actually said, Mario, I want to buy some physical gold. So he's aware of what's going on, even though he's still in the system. He's putting a foot outside the system. So to the markets and to a little bit of Russia. Yes, I've read a lot about over the last 24 hours what it means, all the sanctions, all the instability in that part of the world to do with natural gas. I know that the Germans said that Nord Stream 2 now is off topic. They're not going to approve it. But don't forget, the Germans still have Nord Stream 1. So I think there is a problem with the energy, but there's also a problem with raw materials. I saw that the West, especially Biden, wants to block Russia from technology, but I was reading as well that Russia has a lot of rare earth metals and things like titanium that are very important. So it's not as easy, and I think a lot of the sanctions that are being imposed is just for political image to tell the public we're doing something about it. But one thing that is a little more worrying that I noticed yesterday is the price of agricultural commodities, and they had a pretty big day yesterday. And as you can see here, wheat was up 3%. We saw soybean oil up just over 3%, corn up 2.6%, soybeans up 1.7%. And yes, it's just one day's action, but I put the charts here to show you that we are near the multi-year highs in all these four agricultural commodities. And I brought up also the Rogers International Commodity Fund, and it's mainly exposed to grains, agricultural commodities. And as you can see, it's up almost 10% year to date. Then you have cotton as well. I've covered this before. We are near multi-year highs, if not one decade high. We've got live cattle as well, making new highs. We've got lumber, which is slightly different, but that's still highly elevated compared to pre-2020, and lean hogs even. So I looked a little bit at some information, global corn production by country. And yeah, the United States, China, and Brazil are the top producers. But if you look at Ukraine and Russia, they're not the top producers, but if you add up their total, it's quite significant. So it could disrupt things, the global corn production. And then you look at wheat, China is number 3, and Ukraine is number 9, and you add that up, and that's over 100 million metric tons. So that would make Russia and Ukraine, the second biggest wheat producers, and then you have China, which is the number one. So that is worrying, I think, and this is one of the things that I think could evolve. It could make the food crisis, the supply chain crisis, even worse. Soybean production by country, I got that as well. You got Ukraine and Russia at number 8 and 9. So it's very difficult to say because I cover more the bigger picture here. I'm not a specialist in supply chain. I'm not a specialist in energy, or more of a specialist in precious metals, of course. But I would say that the crisis in Russia is like Rahm Emanuel says, never let a crisis go to waste. There's a lot of birds that they could kill here. And by them, I mean the globalists. And we need to be on the lookout. And yes, so let's look at the markets now. And it's just before 9 a.m. London time. So we've got spot gold trading at 1893.40. It's down 5. Yes, it is a little frustrating, but don't forget this 1900, 1920 area is very important. So it's going to take a while maybe to break through it. The high has been 1901.50 overnight and the low 1892. Silver is pretty much unchanged, down a couple of cents at 24.08. Low has been 24.01 and the high 24.25. Key level, I think, as Michael Oliver said recently, is going to be 24.45, I think. If we close the week above that level, he thinks we could have fireworks in silver. The Dow future is up 220 points, 0.2%. NASDAQ is up 1%. The S&P future is up 0.75%. Yes, I noticed that the S&P is down now 10% year to date from yesterday's closing, and that the NASDAQ is down about 15%. So gold and silver are up about 5%. So someone asked in the comment section, what would happen to gold and silver if the stock market crashed? Well, there's your answer. This year it seems to be slightly different. And I'm not saying the stock market is crashing here. Of course, it's going down, but it's not a crash. FTSE 100 index is up 0.5%, 75.36. To the currencies, sterling is at 136.04. That's up 0.15%. The euro is up 0.2 at 113.45. Dollar is unchanged versus the Japanese yen, 115.12. And actually the dollar is getting really hammered here versus the Chinese currency. We're almost approaching the key level here from March 2018, which was around 623.50. We are actually at 630.88, so the dollar's down 0.25%. The low's been 630.66. So that's very interesting. The dollar's continuing to lose ground versus the yuan. Aussie dollar is up 0.5%, 72.55. The dollar's down 0.5% versus the Canadian dollar, 127.15. And the Kiwi dollar is up 0.7% at 67.88. To the general commodities. So we've got WTI crude down 0.5% at 91.09. We've got high-grade copper up 0.75% at 454.70. U.S. nat gas is down 0.2% at 445. To finish off, quickly look at the 10-year yield. 10-year yield is almost back up to 2%. It's up 2.5 basis points at 1.98. The other thing I would say is that the yield curve from 2-year to 10-year is continuing to flatten. We're not inverted yet, but we could very quickly go to inverted on the yield curve. Right now, the 2-year note yield is 1.62. So only about 35 basis points now difference between the 2s and 10s. And that's a sign that the economy is slowing down. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Please share it far and wide. Think about subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on Rumble, Twitter, Facebook, and all these other platforms below here. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.